And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the stream. I hope you're doing well, that you had a nice beginning of the week and all that. I'm very happy to have you back here for a new interview with a member of the European Parliament. Tonight, we will discuss with MEP Svenja Hahn. Svenja Hahn, I'm trying to pronounce that correctly, from the Renew Europe group, so on the center of the European Parliament, so European politics. She's 32 years old and she has been a German MEP since 2019, so it's her first mandate. She's currently a member of the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection and a substitute member in the Committee on International Trade. As usual, before we start the conversation with Ms. Hahn, as usual, I will remind the house rules for anyone who would be new with us tonight. So, our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, she will be able to enjoy the rest of her evening, and you will be stuck with me for another half an hour to debrief the interview, discuss about what you thought, provide any additional context or explanation that are needed, those sort of things. As always, I have prepared my own questions for Ms. Hahn, and I also collected questions from you guys on Reddit and Discord. Actually, I got a lot of questions, very interesting questions, so I had to make tough choices for tonight. But of course, as always, you can react and suggest your questions live via the chat. It's there for that. I will keep an eye on it, and I will pick among your suggestions. So don't hesitate to react and participate, but as always, don't spam and stay civil. The goal of these interviews with MEPs for you to better understand who they are, what is their job, what are their priorities, what they do for you, and help you forge your opinion on the EU and EU politics. Due to that, we will try to not go too deeply into policy, to try to not lose you, and we will only talk about EU politics, so no national politics, unless it's relevant to the EU. So please keep that in mind when you are asking your questions in the chat. And on this note, well, I suggest that we start. Good evening, Ms. Hahn. Thank you for accepting to join us tonight and answering our questions. So you heard me do my little introduction and all that. So is there anything that I forgot to mention about you and that you would like to add or anything?
I think it's perfectly fine. I'm a member of the European Parliament since 2019. I'm working currently in two. I used to work in 3 committees. I'm having a strong focus on a digital Europe, but also on trade aspects. And I'm actually I came into the Parliament coming from youth politics. So for a very long time, I was a member of the board of the European umbrella organization of young liberals throughout the whole EU. So this is something that's very close to my heart, engaging for young people in Europe. So that's maybe also interesting for those joining us tonight.
Well, actually,
otherwise, I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Well, actually, let's start. Let's start by talking about you. How and why did you go into politics and later became an MEP? What was the spark for you that got you into politics?
I actually think a lot of people join politics because they are mad or annoyed by something, because they see things are not working and they want to change it. And that was exactly the case for me. So I've always been like a little nerd. I think since I was like 14, 15, I wanted to study history. And when I finally got to study, I was so excited, but I couldn't. Because when I started studying in 2009 at my university, there was a big demonstration and students were on strike. They demanded more money for education, and they did so by blocking the university. So nothing could happen, no events could take place. And I was like super frustrated with those students because they were, I was supportive as they were fighting for better education, but they were keeping me away from what I wanted to do. But then I realized, well, who are you to complain? You're not doing anything to make it better yourself. So maybe it's time to do something. And that's how I decided to join student politics. I ran for the student council, got involved with the liberals. And then very soon I realized, actually there's more to life than just your immediate surroundings at university. And I joined the Liberal Youth Party of Germany. I joined the Liberal Party, the Free Democratic Party. And I very quickly realized, okay, European politics, that is actually what is really interesting, where really the future is shaped. and I started getting active on a European level as a volunteer in youth organizations in 2014.
And so now you are in the European Parliament. Like I mentioned, you belong to two committees currently. You said you used to be in three, so you're in the IMCO, so the Internal Market Committee, and INTA, the Trade Committee. So those are arguably two of the most powerful and let's say important committees in the European Parliament. But before we dive into these committees precisely, so something that often we hear is people criticize the EU for is that they perceive the EU about being only just a market. It's only a market. It's only doing things for the market. So do you think that the EU is indeed something that is just for the market, or is it actually already more than that, and should it be more than that?
That is an excellent question. I would like to answer it on two levels. I mean, the European Union came out of a practical. The European Union grew out of the big tragedy of the Second World War. And it was the idea, you know, if goods cross borders, soldiers won't. That was like the idea behind that. So ever closer economic cooperation between democracies will help prevent war again between those nations. So this is the origin, but today the European Union is way more than just economic cooperation. We are a union of values, but as we see, those values such as democracy, such as freedom, are never given and always need to be protected and defended. So this is something we really need to do. And currently we're seeing that the EU, that we see a lot of things where we're like, why is the EU not doing something on that? We saw it in the corona. Why is the EU not doing something here? Oh, because the EU doesn't have competences. Like, for example, getting the vaccines together. That was the member states needing to mandate the Commission. So we see a discrepancy between what we expect the EU to do and what it actually can do. And I think that is why we need reform. But also, you said like, oh, it's just the market. What about the people? That is the second part. What is the markets? We are the markets. And that is also why I'm doing, I started with youth politics. So I often get asked, why are you not in the education committee? You know, Erasmus, something for young people. And that's why I always say a good economy creates the opportunity for good education, for a good career, to create the life that you want. That's why I do trade, because it is actually a tool to create opportunities for people. Inside the EU, it's about, you know, having a good quality of life. But for many of our trade partners in other parts of the world, and especially in least developed countries, it's actually about creating opportunities for people to get out of poverty, to be more the shapers of their own life. So I think in those two aspects, markets is everyone, and the EU is much more than a market.
And so now you are in the committee. Let's start with this one. You mentioned it. I think you work quite a lot on artificial intelligence policy. So it's kind of AI is kind of a buzzword, these days. So perhaps could you tell us a bit about how the EU should tackle AI? Should there be EU-wide rules for AI?
So what are we actually doing right now? Why do we need rules on artificial intelligence? So AI is in many aspects not regulated. And in most aspects, we're talking about product aspects. So, I mean, we have a lot of applications that have no risk. You know, when you are swiping through your Tinder and you get the next presentation, when you are getting a song by your streaming service, that also is AI behind that, and that has no risk. I mean, what is the riskiest thing that can happen to you on, let's say, Spotify, maybe a folks music song, okay? That is not so scary. But we have other applications where there's more risk. Let's talk about, for example, biometric recognition. It's okay for me to, you know, unlock my phone with it, but I absolutely do not want mass surveillance in public spaces through biometric recognition. This is something that would certainly undermine our citizens' rights. We look towards China, where we see technologies like artificial intelligence being used to massively surveillance and oppress their citizens. So I think it's really high time that the EU finds its own way to use potential, because there's a massive potential for our society, for our economies, in a European way. And that is why we need to have a framework that is based on our citizens' rights to really use that potential.
You already mentioned face recognition AI, and that was actually the question I received was whether you thought that this kind of AI should be completely forbidden in the EU because notably of the president of China and all that. So are you in favor of a clear-cut ban EU-wide on face recognition?
Well, we always need to talk about the appliances, how it's applied, not the technology itself. The technology of biometric recognition is fine and can have, good purposes if you voluntarily want it, like unlocking your phone, for example. But we need to ban, and I'm very much an advocate of banning the application of biometric surveillance. There are way more risks than actually potential usages for that. So this is something that I'm advocating for right now. I really hope that we're going to be able to secure a majority in the parliament. In just about 2 weeks, we have the deadlines inside the committees to finish our positions on the Artificial Intelligence Act. And then we're going to negotiate in the committees our position. And in the autumn, we are going to vote on it in the parliament. And then we see, and my goal in that is to fight for a ban. It's going to be a very uphill battle, but we're fighting for it. And then we'll see what the end position will be. And then we're going to have the negotiations with the member state, the council, and the commission, who both are in favor of using biometric recognition also for surveillance purposes.
So just to precise, in this case, in the case of member states, it's mostly use of AI for security, judicial purposes. So there is more like an exception, like to a ban, let's say, rather than a general authorization of any kind of surveillance
it is
technology.
for the purpose, for example, the suggestions, the cases that they're giving for terrorists or for abducted children. But the problem with those technologies is, well, they're very expensive. You need to run them. Once you have them in place, who does not say, let's use it for this other case? Once opportunities are there and data are there, it's going to be used. We saw that in Germany. During the Corona times, everyone had to register that they're there in order that the health authorities can contact other guests of a restaurant when there was a Corona case. But police used it, for example, for other reasons. So we know that once data is there, once things are there, it will be used for other things.
And beyond the AI, I had a question on a bunch of questions that I summed up into the idea of how is your work in the European Parliament, and let's say more specifically in IMCO, impacting concretely the daily life of citizens? Because often people have the image of something like the EU doing something very technical that will never concern them. So are there actually things that impact citizens, not today, but maybe tomorrow or the day after?
Absolutely. It often has a feeling like European politics is very far away. But you said in the beginning that the Trade Committee and the Single Market Committee are actually very powerful. Why did you say that? Because those are committees that have a lot of decisive power. For example, in the Single Market Committee, the reason why you can have your favorite yogurt from Denmark at a reasonable price in your local supermarket is because of the single market. So a lot of that we're working on is setting a framework. So you're experiencing the single market in your everyday life without even realizing it is single market. Let me give you an example. So we're currently working on standardization strategy. Standards and norm does not sound sexy, I know that, but it's actually something in our everyday life. Standards and product safety, for example, means that you can rely on, you're buying food in the supermarket, you can rely on that it has safety standards, that it's safe for you to consume, that nothing will happen to you, that you have rights as a consumer. The single market is also the Consumer Protection Committee. For example, when you fly and when you travel, then and your flight gets cancelled, you have the right to a reimbursement and to a new flight and to an accommodation when you have to stay overnight. Those are all things that are harmonized in the Single Market Committee. So a lot of those achievements that we feel already as something normal in our everyday life or in our routine life is actually something that was once agreed in those committees as a same framework.
I'm going back on AI because I just have a question on it that pops up in the chat. So someone who actually is working with AI soon, the person is asking, how do you imagine the regulation of AI will look like in the EU beyond like the risk-based approach that you described?
The big relation in what regard? Did he clarify a bit?
What kind of beyond the risk base? What will the EU regulate?
So the whole legislation is basically a product-based regulation, coming from ensuring that we have safe products, because there are applications like biometric that pose a risk to our civil societies. But a lot of AI applications are just in regard to product safety aspects. So I'm going to be very dramatic here now. Often in AI, it's talked about, the safe driving car. Who the self-driving car gonna run over, the young kid or the old lady, But the actual debate is who is gonna pay for when there's a problem with the artificial self-driving car if that crashes? Who is responsible for that? Is it the owner? Is it the developer? Is it someone that was part of the engineering process? Because with artificial intelligence, especially when it is self-learning and transfers itself for that, it is hard to figure out where the process something was wrong. So that's actually a challenge in that regard. So this is what it's looking into. What kind of risk is coming from a certain way of application, and how to figure out who is responsible for that. So it's actually more a product regulation.
And so going back to your example of the car, who in this case would be responsible? Would it be the engineer? Would it be the driver of the car at this stage?
That is actually something that we're currently figuring out, that we're currently debating. How are we going to do that? In current way now, it would be, of course, first responsible is the driver of the car. But in that regard, we need to talk about that it is no longer as a default the driver being responsible to prove that there was a fault, but that it needs to be, and that is the question, who of the entities that produce this application or this technology, who is responsible to prove that it was not their fault? So this is the debate that we're having right now. It's a very hot topic, and this is something I would really recommend if you're interested in following this, because it's going to be very groundbreaking.
Another very hot topic that actually I got a lot of questions on from German people is about a new EU legislation that was proposed actually last week by the EU Commission about tackling child abuse online. So basically it's a EU regulation, so EU law that is in two parts. On the one hand, you have some services that must do risk assessment, so they must examine their own services to see what kind of risk they pose to in terms of child abuse, and then take mitigation measures. And the second part is allowing the judicial orders to be given to services to detect and remove child abusive content. And some are calling this regulation chat control, because it could lead to a possible weakening of end-to-end encryption. So think about your WhatsApp, your Telegram, that kind of thing. So it's been actually very much criticized in Germany. Today, the German Data Protection Authority came out very strongly against it. So where do you stand on this regulation, on this debate?
Well, let me start with, I think we need to fight child sexual abuse and child sexual abusive material online very intensively. But the Commission used the absolutely wrong part to start with it. We need better law enforcement. We need better cooperation of law enforcement authorities in that regard, and not creating authoritarian surveillance state. I would not even say this is opening Pandora's box. I would even say this is, a dream of an authoritarian state. I am absolutely against this chat control. I think it's fully undermining citizens' rights. It's completely against the right to privacy, the right to encryption. the right to private messages. This is also something that in the German government, we even have in our government treaty. So I'm very happy that our digital minister already came out and said, we're going to oppose this. And this is something that my party is heavily going to oppose in the parliament as well. So why is it so problematic? First, it would basically mean to outsource law enforcement work to private companies, because it would be private companies that need to ensure they have algorithms in place that would go through all the devices a user is having. So we outsource law enforcement work to private entities. That is first a no-go for me. And second, we know that those AI systems have a high risk rate of falling out, of false identifications. So that wrong pictures different pictures can be identified wrongly. And also the AI cannot tell if you have the right to have that picture. I mean, I don't have children, but I have quite a lot of friends with children. And I know they have, pictures of their children in the bathtub or on the beach. Those are pictures that, parents take of their kids playing and not of pedophiles in that regard. But the AI cannot tell if that's a loving parent or a pedophile that has that picture on their phones. And then the AI system automatically reports to the police. I think that sounds like a surveillance state to me. It's completely undermining citizens' rights. I'm heavily against that. We need to fight the chat control, but actually I'm going to introduce as well an amendment to the AI Act to try to get something like this into a forbidden practice so that we tackle it in different legislative aspects, because I think it's an absolute no-go with high risks for citizens' rights.
So this chat control debate, it's not a new topic, and it has been in the European Parliament before on another regulation. It's a very, very debated issue, and someone in the chat was asking, given how sensitive the issue is and divisive it is, how likely do you think that this law would get approved as it is?
Well,
in Parliament?
It's a very, very, very fresh proposal by the Commission, but it's not something new. To be perfectly honest, we see especially conservatives for years and years, especially in Germany, always coming with the argument of fighting sexual abuse of children with new surveillance methods. I would really wish they would spend the energy of better supporting law enforcement in actually combating that and doing their work, than coming always up with new surveillance rules. So it is something that we always see coming up. We see a strong wave of pushback against it from the Parliament. I actually have not seen from other member states something on that. I only seen maybe something. My party will take a very strong stance against it in the German government. Also, we have in our coalition treaty, for example, the right to encryption, the right to privacy, and that would be completely led ad absurdum. So definitely, I'm 100% certain that Germany is going to block that. So I think this is not something that can come along. And also, if this comes along, well, I guess then we can stop talking about we are the holding up the torch of democracy and freedom and pointing fingers to authoritarian regimes.
One final question on this topic. So you mentioned, you're very much in favor of fighting against child abuse and all that, and that was never in question. But you said, it should more means should be put into the enforcement. So for you, the way to fight against child abuse online can only be ex post, so only in enforcement. There's nothing preventive that can be done.
I'm not an expert in that regard, but I think what it needs on one aspect is a lot of education of young children and teenagers on how to act safely on the internet, but also education of parents, because a lot of material that is out there in those kind of forums are often pictures that parents load up of their kids on the internet as well, that to them are harmless. It's like their little kids playing or doing something, just existing, and it's like those people take it from social media platforms and put it in those platforms. So I think a large part is about education, and then about law enforcement training, skills, financial equipment, to find those platforms and to take it down, and also better on the European side, better cooperation of law enforcement. And also there's potential for artificial intelligence that can be even more broader use. It is already deployed in many countries. For example, artificial intelligence can go through all that material and match it to material that is known, for example, to see if that is material, so that no law enforcement officer would have to actually look at that process only in the last stage to verify, for example, or to search those materials for faces of perpetrators to make it easier to identify those people. So there's a lot of opportunity in classic law enforcement strengthening that we can do, but also using artificial intelligence in a way that is not undermining everyone's citizens' rights.
All right, let's move on a bit and talk about your work in the trade committee this time. So another thing that has a lot of discussion, creates a lot of discussion, especially these days with the war in Ukraine. And actually, I had a question specifically on that. Question is very simple: what is your opinion on the cessation of all trade relation with Russia?
On the sorry, what?
On stopping to do trade with Russia.
Oh yes. I mean. What are we talking about? Russia is completely breaking all agreements that we had on international cooperation. Russia is showing that you cannot rely on them in a partner in any aspect. Every agreement, every treaty that you have with them is either now null and void, or you cannot rely on them working. How will you ever be able to rely on the word of the Putin government again? It's not possible. This is a war that Ukraine must win. That is why we need to do our utmost to support Ukraine in this fight, because this is really the big clash of our time. It is autocracy versus democracy. And in trade, we see this for years. We see that in the clash, for example, with China. But we also see it now in the battlefield that is Ukraine now, turned by Russia. So there will not be a business back to business as usually with Russia. We do not yet know how long the war is taking. We need to do our utmost to dry up the financial reserves of Russia to finance this war. And there needs to be a victory by Ukraine, and then there hopefully can be a diplomatic solution afterwards. But there won't be a back to business with Russia. And I would really recommend every business owner to go out of Russia. There is currently no foreseeable future.
And speaking of Russia, and you mentioned a bit China. Germany, your country, has been known for years for its policy for chain through trade. So the idea that by having close commercial ties with countries like Russia and China, you would they would be pushed toward a more open political system. So after having seen like the China now, Russia, the war in Ukraine, all that, do you still believe? Do you believe that this policy of change through trade is relevant, realistic, or not?
I absolutely do believe that positive change can come through trade cooperation, but there are also limits to it. In the last years, we have seen that trade has always been used, like we had a lot of expectation being put on trade. Trade needed to fix climate change, all social injustices, also be a diplomatic thing. And why was that? Trade was used because it is an EU competence, and it was used in the absence of a real common diplomacy and a real common security policy, for example. So all those expectations were put into trade. And so we need to be realistic. Trade cannot fix all the problems in the world, but I think it can contribute positively. We see that in many countries, for example, less developed countries. The EU has a special agreement for those countries. Those countries can export almost all their products without any tariffs into the EU. For example, it's the EBA, everything but arms. It says you can basically send everything but arms into the EU without tariffs. For that, those countries need to respect fundamental human rights. But we saw, for example, in the agreement with Vietnam, Vietnam is still a communist country, and a trade agreement will not turn it into democracy overnight. But for example, in the agreement, they needed to agree to ban child labor, to allow freedom of assembly, allow unions, labor unions, for example. So there can be positive change through trade. The trade will never fix all the problems in the world, and we cannot be naive. Russia and China are authoritarian regimes. They have no intention of turning into democracy. So we need to be realistic what trade can achieve.
Speaking of China, there was an investment agreement negotiated between the EU and China actually during the final days of the German presidency a couple of years ago. And one of the conditions was that China was committing to try to join the International Labor Organization when it comes to forced labor. Do you think that this is realistic to expect that China will actually, because of the EU is asking, sign to international labor laws? Or was it a bit naive from the EU?
Well, the whole Kai was not a good deal, in my opinion. Well, first, because it was not addressing the problems that we have in China. And second, it was actually not addressing the problems that we have with China, with is unfair trade practices, unfair treatment of European investment, of European companies being their false transfer of knowledge. So the Kai was a nice try, but it actually was absolutely coming short on all the issues we have there. And it's completely on ice now. Because of especially the human rights situation. Maybe some of you have followed that. It's of course a terrible situation in Hong Kong. China broke international treaties there and democracy in Hong Kong. But especially the situation in Xinjiang, where the Muslim minority of the Uyghur people is in camps, is having to do forced labor. We have reports about rapes, about forced abortions, about torture. Some parliaments like Canada, for example, already concluded and to decide this a genocide, what China is doing on the Uyghur people. And that is why the European Parliament spoke out against that and called actually for sanctions. And in reaction to that, the EU put some sanctions on officials that are responsible for that. And in reaction to that, China sanctions, for example, the whole Human Rights Committee of the European Parliament. So we said, we're clearly going to put this on ice, and there's no way this is going to come down as long as the sanctions are in place, and especially not when there is no oppression of the Uyghur people.
So something that you said previously that was I thought was interesting was the idea that people are deflecting their expectation on foreign affairs, on defense, on environment, on trade policy, because trade policy is a competence of the EU. So do you think that when the EU is having the discussion, okay, when we're having trade agreements, we should add clauses on environment, on labor laws, etc. That's misguided. Trade agreement should be about trade and that's it, and the rest should be we should have a stronger environmental policy and that's it?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
I think we need to be realistic what trade can do. It's not going to fix all the problems, but trade can and must contribute to that. For example, climate change. Of course, trade has an impact on the environment. Talk about shipping, for example, talk about production. But I think it can also have a positive impact. So, for example, the Paris Climate Agreement is voluntarily, but in trade agreements, we can actually make our partners also commit to expecting that. We can, for example, India. I've just been recently to India to talk about with our counterparts there for the planned negotiations on a trade agreement. For example, India is a very sunny country, but also they could massively benefit through trade and technologies like solar power, or we could benefit from their plans on producing hydrogen. So, for example, trade in those aspects, trade in technology, can also have a massive positive aspect, but also we can make our partners commit to that. Or you mentioned international labor law. I think what is very important is to make clear that we cannot and we should not apply our European standards on our partners or force even our partners to do that. But we can show that we are an attractive partner to work with and that there are benefits of this. And for example, Paris Agreement, that is an international agreement. We did not came up with this. We have the International Labor Organization. It is international standards that most of the countries of the world signed up to already, which is combating, for example, child labor or have some work limitations. Because also we need to ensure that trade benefits people. And I'm a strong advocate for trade. But that means for me working for future where it's not exploiting people, where it's not exploiting the nature, because that is not very future proof.
All right. Now we're going to tackle a bit the questions that are a bit more general about the EU and the state of parliament and all that. So I had a question that I thought was interesting for someone. That was, should the EU shift towards a stronger, like a protectionist approach of economy? And how could this be implemented? And he explains the question by saying that currently one of the reasons why we see Europhobic political movement exist, particularly in Western Europe, is because people feel that their country and themselves benefit less from the EU than other countries, let's say the Eastern country, but also from the outside of the world, so that they are, let's say, victim of globalization. So do you think that the EU should turn a bit more protectionist or not?
Well, to those people, I would always like to say, well, look at how it's going for the Brits, because it's not going really great for them, to be perfectly honest, economy-wise. I think they're just happy about that. It's hard to tell what is because of the corona pandemic and what is because of Brexit and their economic situation. I absolutely do not think I'm a very strong advocate against protectionism. It's very simple. The EU is not self-sustainable. We have not the resources we need to make our economies work, to make our future work, to make the Green Deal work. We need collaboration, but what we see is that we need to decrease dependencies on certain regions and on certain countries. For example, China, or we see it now with Russia. We made ourselves, especially as a German, for years we have been very depending on Russian energy. We're working now with high speed to get out of that. We're reducing massively and searching for alternatives on gas and oil to get out as soon as possible. But we see we've been very dependent on that. We have been very dependent economic-wise on China. So we really need to diversify. But I believe the key to a strong and independent Europe, because this is what we talk about, like an independent sovereign Europe, is not achieved by making Europe go alone, but by having more and broader partners. And for that, I think it's especially important that we focus on cooperation with democratic partners.
An interesting point that I see in the chat that I will link to just what you said. The question is that we saw during the Corona crisis a shortage of chips, so chips, the things that your computers, your phones and all that, in the EU, because China was reducing production, because there was a shortage of production in Taiwan, those kind of things. And one of the debates is whether we should encourage companies to increase manufacturing in Europe, so the concept of reshoring industry. So do you see that as being compatible, or with your idea of an open economy, or is it protectionism?
No, absolutely. I think we need to be very realistic. I think we need to diversify. We're not going to be able to work on our own, and we should not. We need partners in this world, and those partners especially need to be other democratic countries. We need to diversify our international trade chains, but also we can look at why are we not attractive for certain sectors, and what is strategically important. And chips, like microchips, is certainly one of those aspects. So I think it is absolutely relevant that we identify key industries in order to be less dependent on other countries or region and try to make it attractive for those companies to produce in Europe. This is actually happening with the chips, for example. In fact, in Germany, there's going to be a big giga factory for microchips. So I think it's a good example. Another example could, for example, be pharmacies. A lot of pharmaceutical products are produced in India or in China. And also there are dependencies. So looking into that can also be, what can we produce ourselves reasonably and what not, and where can we need to diversify our trade chains.
Let's talk a bit now about Parliament, the image of Parliament and the work of an MEP. From a number of comments that I got, Parliament has a bad image in the public. Often regular people talk about it like, oh, but the European Parliament doesn't have any power. It's enslaved to lobbies. MEPs are just washed-up national politicians that are just like being outsourced to Brussels. So I imagine that you will disagree to that. But how then do you think the Parliament should get rid of this image and, let's say, redeem itself to regular citizens?
That is an excellent question. I mean, part of why I'm doing this today is exactly about that, to show the face of a parliamentarian, to reach out, because we often have the issue that European politics is coming a bit short on national media. No media criticism. I think media is very important for media, but when I compare it with national politics, the amount they get and coverage, it's a very different aspect. But especially when I set it into a comparison with how much legislation is coming that's impacting all our life, it's like this much EU, this much national, but the media coverage is vice versa. And also in the EU, we're always competing. So it's like, the member state saying something on EU topics is the Commission, and then maybe an MEP. So we always have three institutions, and always it's shortened. It's like very often, the EU wants to do this or that. But, you would never say in a national context, Germany is doing this or that. You would always say, which institution? Is it like the Chancellor? Is it a group in the Parliament? Who is it? You would never say Germany if it's a specific institution. This is often what we see happening with the EU. So I think we need more detailed communication, what is actually happening. I understand that the process in the EU is maybe a bit more complicated than in national politics, but it's really no rocket science. It's really no rocket science. You have three institutions. You have the Commission making proposals, you have the Parliament demanding that, and you have the Council having their position, and in the end, it's a member state and the Council and the Parliament negotiating. So it's no rocket science in the process. We need to talk more about it, and also we all need to have good efforts to talk about European politics and to reach out. It's not always easy. I mean, we are about 700 members for the whole of Europe. I mean, in Germany, we have 96 members. But that's 96 people that need to reach out to an audience of 80 million people. So we're always doing our best, and I really hope, for example, tonight helps to, help you guys get a bit of a better understanding about how the European Parliament works and what we're doing.
So another common image, like I mentioned, is that the Parliament is enslaved to lobby. So very short answer, very short question and short answer if possible. Someone was asking, probably as a troll question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I will make it something interesting in the debrief part, is how many lobby meetings did you have this week, or have you planned this week, if any?
I don't think any. No, but also it's very transparent. You can go to my website on the European Parliament, and there you see every lobbyist that I've ever met since I'm a member of the European Parliament.
So there's transparency on your meetings.
So there is transparency. We have a lobby register. Every interest organization needs to register themselves, and it's mandatory for parliamentarians when they are working on a file to register this in the transparency register. I register every meeting that I have on top of those that I need to register. I think it's important to have an exchange with stakeholders, and when I work on a file, I try to meet with everyone, with from every side, from those that I agree with, that I disagree with, from companies, from civil rights organizations, from NGOs, because I mean, in the end, lawmakers are very rarely an expert. They may be expert on one topics and they read themselves and so they learn. So a lot of these meetings about learning how a legislation would affect others. And then you hear a lot of those opinions, and in the end, you take a political decision. And that is why I think it's important to hear those different stakeholders. But in the end, you're the politician, you are elected, you need to take a political decision. And I think the transparency is really important.
All right. Someone was asking me, what is the main difference between the European liberals and the German FDP?
Well, I think liberalism comes in all sizes and shapes and faces and forms. The German liberals is a very broad liberal party. We have a strong focus, for example, on economy and trade, but also on citizens' rights. And in other countries, for example, we have 2 or maybe even 3 liberal parties that focus maybe more on a social liberal aspect or more on an economy aspect. So we are a very broad center, and that often means that we can be, bridge builders in our group between different shapes of liberalism in our group. So in the European Parliament, actually, you're coming with, your party program, your colleagues from the same group coming with their party program, and the negotiation already starts inside your own group to make a compromise. With that, you can then go to the other groups.
And still on this time more on German politics and EU politics. So Germany and particularly Chancellor Scholz was very criticized for now a few months since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. So do you think that Germany is being a bit unfairly criticized for dragging its feet on the question of sanctions to Russia, on the help to Ukraine, or is it fair to criticize and that Scholz is wrong in his way of doing things?
Well, I think you can always criticize everyone, so I'm not going to criticize anyone that criticizes. But I think what is maybe not so much in the focus, that Germany is working very hard on that. Maybe it's the German way, maybe it's the Scholz way of not being very outspoken, but Germany is working very hard on decreasing the dependencies on Russian energy. For example, in oil, I think we were around 35%. We already went down to 12%. So it is happening. Germany is working very hard on that, on decreasing that. I think every year that is going to Russia is something that needs to pain us. And we need to work very hard on that, and that is happening. But I mean, it's no secret that my party was a strong advocate, for example, on delivering heavy weaponries, for example, to Ukraine very early on. So I'm very, very happy that finally it's also the government position that we're moving forward, because I think, especially from our history, we have the duty to support those that are fighting for freedom.
All right. And still on Germany, and again connecting that to the EU and current debates. So one of the points in the coalition agreement between the Greens, the FDP, and the SPD was the general idea that the EU in the longer term should become a federal state, which is, to my knowledge, the first time a country was actually putting that in a government agreement. But in practice, how do you think this should happen? Even if we're talking about long term. How and why? And especially since these days we're talking a lot about changing treaties with the Conference on Future of Europe and all that. So how do you see the path towards a potential EU federal state?
Well, it's certainly something that needs a treaty change. But as someone coming from a federal state, this is not something that I'm worried about. Oddly, a lot of people always say, "Oh, federal Europe, that's like a super Europe, Brussels ruling over everything." Absolutely not, because this is quite the opposite of a federal state. that would need a good hard look at what is the EU having competencies right now. What should it have? What should it maybe have new, or maybe give back to the states? Um, so this is something that we would need to talk about in a treaty change, and with a lot of other things that we're talking about. For example, European defense. This is something I've always been speaking about. My party has been speaking about. We even want a shared European army. But a shared European army we can only have if we have a real reform, because who should be responsible? The parliament right now. We need to reform the parliament first. The commission president, I don't think so. So we need to reform the form of the union to make it actually fit for all those challenges that we're having right now. But for that, it needs a treaty change. But I do not think it is impossible.
And speaking of treaty change, to get treaty change, you need the agreement of all member states to change the rules. And what we've seen last week is that there's a bunch of countries that, at least for now, refuse the idea of changing treaties. Right now, we have a list of like 13 countries, if I remember correctly, that do not want to change the treaty. So, and we can expect that some of them, namely Poland and Hungary, have very strong interest in not changing anything. So, how do we deal with the fact that these countries do not want to change the treaties, but without them we can't change the treaties? So, are we stuck? How do we get out of it?
Of course, it's nothing that can be forced on anyone. But I mean, it was quite normal that the treaties of the European Union has been changed throughout the time when the challenges have changed. And this is something that we see right now. So maybe we're not going to be able to, have the big change all in one. But it's clear that there are expectations what the European Union should do, and the limits what it can actually do. So in order to be fit for the future, we need to change. And this is a serious dialogue that we're having. We had the conference on the future of Europe now. We have, like my party and the Liberals have always been very strong advocates that we actually need a council, need some treaty change in that. It's going to be a tough work to convince the colleagues and the other countries that there lies an advantage in that. I think it's in a lot of regard often small countries that are a bit hesitant because they are afraid of, being overruled by bigger countries. For example, if you abolish unanimity. So I think we need to take that into account. It's something we need to work forward together. It's not going to be easy, but also I don't think it's impossible. And especially if you're not trying it, and if you're not starting it, then it's never going to happen. And I think it's a great sign that we have it, for example, in Germany, in the German government agreement, that this is something we want to work for, because change needs some time.
And we just mentioned that we need to manage expectations, but isn't it, don't we have the risk of frustrating people? Because we've had the Conference of Future of Europe, where people have been yelling, yeah, we're going to change the treaty, we're going to change the EU from top to bottom, just give us your ideas. The parliament is very hyped on the idea of changing the treaties, and then suddenly we get to him, well, actually, that's not going to happen, because we need to convince 13 countries to change, so, well, that's going to take a few years. Isn't it like isn't there a risk of having the citizens feel a bit betrayed because we overpromised to an extent?
Yes, I fully agree with you. I mean, the frustration would be rightfully very high if nothing happens, and we say, "Oh, well, thank you for your ideas in the conference for the future. I hope you had a great time in Strasbourg. Sexual hope." That was it. So we really need to do something from that. It certainly won't be implementing every change in that, but we certainly see that the EU needs reform, especially when we talk about enlargement. And we need to fix the problems that we're having while working on getting the other countries ready to join us. But we need to make sure that those problems that we're having are fixed, because it's only going to get more difficult the bigger we grow. But I mean, this cannot stand in the way of enlargement. This cannot stand in the way in getting partner countries in the Western Balkan, but also Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. that clearly have, especially now, a strong safety interest in joining the EU family. So we really need to make sure that we do that. And I think having a German and a French government being in support of that is good, but we really need to convince the smaller member states. For example, my party is advocating that we should have less commissioners. We have already a lot of commissioners, and their portfolios are sometimes so in the responsibilities. Sometimes they're not even having like a real ministry, like their own, it's called like DG, Directorat General. We advocate, for example, to reduce it to 18 commissioners, but that would mean not every country has their own commissioner. And it's something that is very prestigious. So why should not big countries like Germany go first and say, okay, first round with 80 commissioners, we go without one?
All right. I have a question in the chat, which is, how do you feel about a partial federation or multiple level of EU integration in general? So the idea of that countries control whether they want to go to deepen their integration. So the multi-speed Europe.
Yeah. So the idea of multi-speed Europe, basically. I have always been a very strong opponent of a multi-speed Europe. But I must say, over time, I grew maybe into more of a pragmatic person, and rather think it's an opportunity for those that are already ready to go forward and inspire the others to show, there is great potential from doing this. There's great potential from having this closer cooperation in a specific area. It's great, it's great on our side of the river, come join us. So I think there's actually potential in a multi-speed Europe.
And if you could, let's say you have a magic wand, you can snap your fingers, you can change anything in the EU. What would you change and why?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. What would I change immediately? Well, I guess I would change the unanimity rule because that is like the block for a lot of reforms. I think that would be great in allowing for more opportunities.
And one final question, it's what would according to you be a good way to make European politics more appealing and understandable to the public?
Reach out and try to make the messages easier. For example, with a group of other young MEPs from other groups, we have been working on reforms of the European Parliament to make the debates more interactive, but also we're lobbying inside the Parliament to change the calendar. For example, did you know that we have 40 weeks of session a year? There are 52 weeks of the year. 40 of those we are in Strasbourg and Brussels. So 2 weeks are winter holidays, and 4 weeks are summer holidays. And that leaves us with 6 weeks where we are supposed to be either going on delegation travels. For example, I'm in the trade committee, so I travel to countries talking about trade agreements. So it's 6 weeks to either travel on behalf of the Parliament or to be in your constituencies. So maybe you have 4 weeks a year where you can actually be on the ground talking to people. I think this is way too little. I think we need to change the way the Parliament itself works, for example, to reach out to people.
Okay, interesting. So it's been an hour. So before we go to the conclusion, I will give you the final word. If people had to remember one thing, what would be the key message that you would want them to give to them before you leave?
I'm an absolute European by heart. I'm very passionate about citizens' rights, about a digital Europe, and about trade as an opportunity for people.
All right. So thank you very much, Svenja Hahn, for taking the time to answer a question. Chat, make sure to thank her for her time. You can follow her on Twitter. You see the @ below the video feed. Stay with me. We're going to do the debrief in a minute. So Mrs. Hahn, thank you again for your time, and I wish you a good evening.
Thank you so much, MEP Assistant, and thank you everyone for joining us, for taking the time tonight talking about Europe.
Our pleasure. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have fun. All
right, guys. Let's start this debriefing. Tell me everything. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Never happened in the past, but let's be fancy. tell me all your impression. In the meantime, I'm just closing Zoom and no, I don't want to update. Go away. And then I take my notebook where I took. You hated it, Ikaros. Worst interview ever. Oh, I have to stop everything. Okay, it's official. It's the end of the channel. Ikaros doesn't like it. But I know he's joking. Anyway, so my notebook. So what did we talk about? Bunch of stuff. Quite interesting interview. Many interesting questions I got from the German Reddit. I have to give a shout out to German Reddit. They were pretty hyped with their questions. So what did we talk about? We started with the idea that the EU is not just a market, and she said something that I thought was very interesting, and it's very interesting, especially since I've said that in the past. So of course, it can only be interesting what I say. It's the idea that we need to that there is a discrepancy between what people expect from the EU and the actual power of the EU. So she mentioned particularly trade, but it's true that people expect things from the EU, things that they would expect from a country, from an actual state, and most people forget that, better and for worse, the EU is not actually a country, a normal state. It's more, let's say, in between an international organization. So think like the UN, WTO, and all that, and an actual state. And the fact that it's in between is the source of quite a few problems for the EU because of expectation, and also because it doesn't know really what it wants. And you can see that in the divisions between member states, and between what the EU that France and Germany wants is not the EU that Poland and Hungary wants. It's not the EU that the UK wanted. COVID showed people really expect the EU to be a crisis handler. Yeah, I mean that's where the EU, I don't want to say shine, but that's where the EU actually goes forward. I mean the saying is that the EU is only progress through crisis. We've seen that with COVID. We see that today with the war in Ukraine, where the EU is kickstarting a further process on defense. And all that. We've seen that on the foreign policy to a lesser extent when we had the Trump years and the Afghanistan fiasco. So it's a time of crisis that the EU is advancing because, let's say, to be a bit cynical, the member states are a bit back to the wall, and they don't have a chance to they don't have a choice but to advance, because otherwise the whole thing is collapsing on their head. So it's kind of the approach. But I agree that indeed COVID show that the EU can do things in times of crisis, and that the EU has potential to do things that are meaningful. On that, I fully agree. We talked a bunch about artificial intelligence, big topic these days in the EU. What kind of AI should be forbidden, what kind of responsibility and all that, and the idea here of the EU is they go from the observation that today there is, let's say, two big models on artificial intelligence. You have the US model and the Chinese model. The US model is AI should be regulated by the market, so there is no need for rules, everything should be left to the market. And the Chinese approach is the AI should be at the service of the state and basically be used to further the aims of an authoritarian state. And so the EU is saying, okay, we want to have a third way. We want to go the Chinese way, we don't want to go the American way, we want to go the European way. And the European way is the idea that we want AI, we support AI, we think there is potential in AI, but it should be AI that is human-centric, that is centered around European values, human values. And so that's why that the approach of AI in the EU is risk-based. That's what she says. So yeah, the AI that is beyond your Tinder or your Spotify algorithm is not something that is harmful. It's not something that could normally have bad consequences on you. So let's leave it alone. The market can do whatever it wants. But on other kind of AI, though some of them are extremely dangerous and too dangerous to be left possible. So that's the debate on the face recognition AI. And she's a very strong advocate against these kind of AIs. And on that, she mentioned that there is going to be quite a clash with member states and the Commission, because the Commission, under the influence of the Council and the member state, they want these face recognition AI to be possible for the purpose of security, fighting terrorism, and all that. But she is not wanting any of that, and many in the parliament are not. And you have the then in between, then you have to adapt a bit the level of not expectation, but obligations there. So you have transparency, access to algorithm, this kind of thing. But it's very much, it depends on what your AI can do. Can your AI have an impact on people beyond the AI surveillance? You can think, for instance, on AI that have an impact on your job, like AI that would decide whether someone is hired or fired, or AI that have an impact on the judicial system. Is an AI going to have an impact on whether someone is convicted or not? So these kind of things that have a direct impact on citizens, it can become a risk for them. Then there are rules that apply. They can be forbidden, or they can have very strong rules applicable to them. So that's the AI risk approach. The risk approach based of AI in the EU. We talked I mentioned that a bit. She's in what we in Brussels we call IMCO and IMTA, so the Internal Market Committee and the International Trade Committee. Those are considered among top committees, and they're very powerful. IMTA because it relates to trade. Trade is one of the few exclusive competence of the EU, meaning that's something that no member state can act on. The France or Germany could not decide to make a trade agreement on their own with the US or whatever. External trade is the competence exclusively of the EU, meaning that, for instance, the Parliament has a veto on it. So that's why this is a powerful committee, as opposed, for instance, to education, where the competencies are very limited. IMCO, it relates to the internal market. The internal market is the crown jewel of the EU, so of course it's an extremely powerful committee. One day I will do like a ranking of the committees in Parliament to say, okay, which one is more important or powerful, let's say. AI should always be an advisor, not a decision maker. Depends, because like she mentioned, if you take your Spotify, the AI is deciding that the next song is going to be that. So they're going to throw at your face a folk song. It's a decision taken. It's a decision that is taken by the AI. Is it harmful? No. So that's not. It's not seen as an issue there. Yeah, but you can change. But still, yeah, you can change that. You can. There's the thing with AI, you can tweak them, even with a strong decision. Let's say that an AI decides to convict someone, and it was wrong, then you can still, the judge can say, okay, no, I changed the decision because it's wrong, or you tweak the AI, etc. So there's always possibilities to change at some point the decision of the AI. What matters is the level of risk that the decision entails for the user. So that's the. It's not just does it take a decision, does it not take a decision. That's more the kind of thing there. We talked about chat control, so this chat regulation, child abuse regulation that was released actually last week by the European Commission. Big topic, mostly in Germany, mostly in Germany. A lot in Germany, I know. Beyond Germany, a bit less. Like in France, we don't really talk about it. For instance, it's not like something that people are aware of or very active about. But yeah, it's not a new fight. There was already in the past another fight not related to child abuse, but where the topic rise on whether, okay, can we allow companies to take measures to detect and remove child abuse content. And the decision back then was, yes, we can allow temporarily companies to do that through voluntary measures. And so the Commission was supposed then to assess these voluntary measures and decide whether or not to come up with a specific legislation on that. And so the Commission, after a couple of years now, decided, yes, there is a need to intervene, because they consider that voluntary measures are not enough. Like I was looking quickly to the press release of the commission before the stream, and they're mentioning, for instance, that 95 in 2020, 95% of the measures, or at least the I forgot the name in English. Signalement, the notification sent about child abuse was sent by a single company. So that's they're saying, yeah, we can't rely only on voluntary measures. We need something that is more mandatory. We need a framework. Hence why they came up with it. So we have the usual debates. Is it a privatization of justice? Ikaros, I think, in the chat mentioned it. It's pretty much the same debate as we had in the copyright directive. That's true. It's more or less the same themes that we see emerging. Time will tell whether it was let's say a cry wolf kind of situation, so something that was a bit overblown, like in the copyright directive. She mentioned, I didn't stop her that, but there, because she that was her opinion, and that the point was to her what she thought. She mentioned that, oh yeah, we can't ask companies to look by themselves for abuse, child abuse content. Actually, in the regulation, it's a bit more, not necessarily that. Yeah, to an extent, it's more like the company is asked for a limited amount of time to look for specific for let's say specific content. So they will be given like a identifiers, so how the company could spot child abuse. So sometimes it's child abuse abusive content that was already spotted, and so they have to ensure that he can't come up again on their service. And something I was a bit confused when she said that at the end. She said, "Oh yeah, but AI can play a role in the end on this front," which I was confused, because in the end, well, that's that, because you're feeding an AI the content that was already detected that is already abusive, and then you ask the AI to remove this content, and so your human doesn't have to see the content of your conversation and all that. But to my understanding, that it's pretty, to an extent, it's what could be already in the regulation, because you give a judicial order. So again, it's a case by case. And so it can work through AI. So I was a bit confused on that, on the place of AI, and if it's not to an extent like going back to the initial regulation to an extent. What did we talk about? Chain through trade. Yes, the good old German policy. So chain through trade. I will not try to pronounce the German name of the concept. It's something that was, let's say, the follow-up to the German Ostpolitik. The Ostpolitik was in the 70s and the 80s, if I remember correctly. German viewers do correct me if need be. So the Ostpolitik was the policy of opening towards the east by what was then West Germany, to try to increase links and with Eastern Germany and Russia, and try to get them closer and let's say undermine to an extent the Soviet Union. And so the Germans like to think that what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union is actually to a good extent the Ostpolitik, while the American, for instance, think that it's the Reagan policy that led to all this. But why I'm rambling about that is that then it evolved into the policy of chain through trade. It's trade can have a positive impact, because if a country has Starbucks, McDonald's, Levi's in its country, it's less inclined to have difficult relation with the West. And so slowly and on some points it can change. And that was the policy of Germany towards China, towards Russia. That's why they had a lot of business links with them. And let's say that this policy has not been very favorable, let's say, over the past year. Far from it, and we've seen a bit the failure of that, whether on China or even more recently on Russia, and we see slowly the change of policy on that. If I remember correctly, during the German elections, the Greens at the very least, maybe I'm not sure if the FDP was also like that, but Greens for sure was saying change through trade does not work. We need to have a stronger approach to authoritarian state. They are authoritarian. Let's not put business before human rights. To sum it up. But she was mentioning as well that trade can have positive impact. She was mentioning the preferential trade agreements that the EU has with countries in development. So that's, if my memory serves well, it's called the GSP plus deals that allow countries to have access to the European market in exchange for them respecting, to an extent, human rights, transparency, fighting corruption, this kind of thing. So using the EU market as an incentive, say, okay, you want part of the pie, well, then you need to play by the rules, and it could contribute to positive evolution there. But you could argue that this works when you have a very clear differential of power and importance between the EU and the other country, and the EU must have, of course, the upper end, let's say, which is not the case when you're talking about a country like China, for instance. In electoral Euro politics, there are a number of interest areas we're typically seeing. Train, blah 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 blah. What's interest that? Okay, that's the lobby question. I will deal with it when I talk about lobby. If I forget about it, Ikaos, send me a reminder. You can use change through train when change is possible. It's not possible and there's an authoritarian stopping it. True, and that's the limit of the German approach so far. They believed that they could change through chain, and the question is whether the authoritarian state did not reverse the power dynamic. That in the end, the authoritarian state used the business links with the democratic state to try to prevent the democratic state from taking any meaningful action against it, because it had big business interest. So a bit of a reversal of the power relation in that. We talk about the China investment agreement. So for now, it's deep in the freezer, unlikely to be approved anytime soon, because China took a bunch of sanctions against European Parliament, against a number of member states. It's bullying Lithuania, for instance, and all that. But yeah, that was a deal that was pushed through against by the Germans, by Angela Merkel, like in the final days of the German presidency, sitting right next to Mercosur. Mercosur, it's a tiny bit different. Because here the concerns on Mercosur are more linked to environment policy and all that, and agriculture policy also, rather than the mere principle of having a deal with China and the fact that, well, do we want to have an extended trade relationship with China, which is an authoritative state. And also, to be honest, we do have concrete trade problems with China. For instance, the fact that there is no protection of intellectual property in China when it comes to foreign companies. So they are, like, it goes both ways. I'm going to skip on that. Yes, she said that we can't force countries to respect EU rules. To an extent, it's true, like in the sense you can't, like, put a gun to the head of a country and say, well, you're gonna follow the rules, otherwise, well, you're screwed. In practice, it's a bit different because of the power dynamic. It's something that is called the Brussels effect as well. So it's the ability of the EU to indirectly influence the law in other countries. Because of the size of its market. The long story short, the idea is, because the EU is a huge market with strict rules, other countries want to have access to this market, and so they need to respect the rules of the EU. Otherwise, they don't have a slice of the pie. And so the Brussels effect leads to de facto other countries adopting laws that are very close or closer to the EU to be able to access the European market, because it's so appealing to them. And let's say the typical case on that is GDPR, data protection, where the EU, let's say, opened the way, and countries around the world then, let's say, copied the European law to make their own data protection rules. So that's what it's called, the Brussels effect. It's not something. Actually, the funny thing is that it's not something that was. It's not a concept that was invented in Brussels. It's a concept that was developed in the US, in Harvard or Stanford, if I recall correctly. So it's an American scholar who came up with the concept of the Brussels effect. And since then, Brussels love the idea of the Brussels effect. What did we talk about? We talk about reshoring. So reshoring is the idea of having companies go back to the EU to produce certain goods. So we see that a lot in industrial policy, the idea that we should re-industrialize the EU. There's been a number of crises that increased the appeal of that. COVID, when it came to the production of some medicine, because when COVID started, there was a complete stop of trade, and we realized that the EU was completely unable to produce itself a number of very basic medicines. So now, after that there was after that we're still in it, but there is the idea. Okay, we need to make sure that the EU is producing at least some part of its own medicine, so that we're not screwed over if for some reason global trade stops. We see that also in microchips. That was the topic of the questions. We have a crisis where we have a bottleneck in terms of production because China reduces production, but also Taiwan, which is the main producer of microchips, especially for the EU. I think it's 80% coming from Taiwan. They have too much demand, and they can't produce for Europe, and so that's why you can't buy your PS5, for instance, because the PS5 needs a microchip. No microchip, no PS5. Doesn't need to be just the EU, even other democracies like Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. Yeah, of course, that can be something more global, but still, there is this idea of reshoring part of key industry, so that's the good old concept of strategic independence. Like, there is some sector where the EU has a strategic interest of having its own production capabilities. We're talking about key microchips, because microchip is everywhere. We're talking about medicine. We're talking about data centers. So a number of things that are considered to be critical for the EU. The EU is pushing to reshore, to make sure that the EU is able to produce that, because that means that we are more independent toward the rest of the world. We are less, we're less dependent. It's in the name. But there is a big push on that. The idea of strategic independence, strategic independence, strategic sovereignty. Sovereignty. I don't remember the exact term. Something that was pushed very much by Macron. Why not strengthen ties to Africa? There is a bit of that. There is a bit of that to an extent. The idea that the strategic autonomy. Thank you, Ikaos. There is a bit. There is an idea. A number of countries in political parties. For instance, the EPP is quite big on that. Is the idea of increasing the partnership with Africa, because, let's say, the calculus there is that we need to help them because that way they will buy European. But also, if we help them develop, that means that we will have less migration crisis. We won't have a climate catastrophe that would lead to climate refugees. Those kind of things. So there is a bit of that, and there is also like a more geostrategic fight in Africa between the EU and China, because back in the days, some European states, France notably, the UK as well, had a lot of influence in some part of Africa. Nothing was happening in Africa without these countries saying so. I mean, it's in French we call that the précaré. So let's say a reserved area in Africa that was French turf, and nothing was happening there without French say so. And then there was a movement where European countries moved away from Africa, and Africa was not quite keen on detaching itself of European countries because they wanted to be independent and all that. And then we had China moving in, and Russia also to an extent now, moving in and saying, well, we can be friends. You buy a Chinese thing, we help you, and plus we give you money, and we won't bother you with like weird stuff such as democracy, fighting corruption. We don't give a shit about that. Just take the loan, buy Chinese, and that's it. And now there is a big geopolitical fight between Europe and China and Russia there, because Europe realized that it might have done a mistake, that it needs to have an influence there, and so the EU is trying to get back a bit in Africa, because it feels that it is in its own strategic interest. What else? What else? Lobbyist. So Ikaros, I will go back to your question. So we talked about she talked about the importance of meeting lobbyists, that it's business as usual in Brussels. Everyone meets lobbyists. There is no stigma about it. It's normal. You need lobbyists, as long as it's done in transparency. And so she said that in her case, she was fully transparent on the people she's meeting with, and I mean, it's true that generally speaking, the rules in terms of transparency of lobbying in Brussels are way higher than a number of national rules. Like if you compare lobbying rules in the European Parliament compared to the one in the French National Assembly, the European rules are way stronger. But yeah, the idea of that being much lobbying is needed. So going back to your question, Carl. So in electoral Europolitics, there's a number of interest area we typically see: trade, environment, migration, recently health. What's an interest that has a large lobby compared to public engagement, and what's an emergent interest lobby that we plebs don't know about yet? The thing is that I think I said that once on the stream, is that if something exists, it has a lobby. It's basically the rule 34 of European politics. If it exists, it has a lobby. Like I could literally show you. Actually, I'm going to show you. Screw that. Give me a sec. I will. You remember that? Great. Transparency register, and I will up. All right. Let's look at that. All right, that's the transparency register of the European Union. Let me switch that to English. So literally anything. So that's the official register. So if you lobby in Brussels, you want to have access to the Commission, you have to register your lobby in there. So, and that gives you a number of rights. You have to give a number of information. So let's say, okay, I'm in a room. Let's say the brick sector. Brick. There is a bunch of lobbies on Brick Association, Brief and Roof Tile Association. Also, that's bookshop. It's different. Stores, brick and mortar, brick production. So you see, look at all these non-free mason. Yeah. So if it exists, there is a lobby about it, because everything has a stake. Everyone has a stake in European politics, because European politics deals with pretty much everything. So let me put that back. And so the second question is, what do you call a large lobby, as a large lobby compared to public engagement? I don't get that part. On the emerging interest lobby that you plebs don't know about, one that I saw emerge, cryptography is having more and more lobbying in the US and or in the EU. There's been quite a few fights on that lately. Because of financial regulation in the EU, basically, some people in the European Parliament want to apply rules on crypto, like rules that are equivalent, I think, to if I remember correctly, to some banking things. What else is very powerful? There's 20k lobbyists on detergent, but you please never talk about that in the political debate. I mean, if you're talking about the big ones, the big lobbies that you will have, telecommunications, big lobbies, online platforms, of course, big lobbies, agriculture, big lobbies, some NGOs are big lobbies. If you think about Greenpeace, for instance, it's a big lobby. What can I think about banking? Is a big lobby, even if like it took a bit of a hit in 2008. Car manufacturer, you're right. Manufacturer indeed are a big lobby. Industries in general, yes. I mean, generally speaking, companies, you have what is it called Business Europe? Business Europe. Okay, so let me show you that. So Business Europe is let's say the lobby of companies in general. So with the German it's going to be BDI, with the French it's going to be MEDEF. So all the big, it's the lobby of companies in general. You have basically every company, not every company, but a lot of companies and trade associations that are in there. It's an important lobby, but it has the disadvantage of being a big lobby to an extent, because there is so many competing interests inside it that it's hard for it to take strong stance, because the interest of one lobby, one of its members, will go against the interest of another of its members. So it's kind. The lobby and its director is the CEO of business, exactly. So yeah, you have a number of big lobbies. Telecommunication, yeah, it's definitely a big lobby. Oh, EIF you consider as a lobby. Interesting. Yeah, EIF is more like a I want to say a think tank, because they organize events more than anything. They don't push positions, but yeah, sorry. Like tire and rubber. So yeah, if it exists, it has a lobby. Energy, probably big lobbies, of course. Tobacco, those kind of things. So Google, Intel. So yeah, tons and tons of a big sector. Latex mattresses. Yeah. Latex, maybe? Latex does the balloon in party council. What the fuck is that? Okay, balloon in party council. Now I need to know the European Balloon and Party Council. What the fuck is that? I wish it's great to the industry. We can improve blah 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 blah. Okay. Toys and decorative product for vital illustration. Okay. Single-use plastic. So you see, it sounds like something. Yeah. To be honest, for a second, I thought it was like a parody lobby or anything. But again, yeah, like you see, something as, let's say, stupid as party balloons. They're covered by toy regulation, single-use plastic, chemicals. REACH is the chemical regulation. So everything has an interest and is impacted by Brussels. So everything has a stake in Brussels. So that's why Brussels is the second biggest city in the world when it comes to lobbying. I wrote mattress wrong. Oh. I write stuff wrong. Let's see. No, even without the typo, still nothing on mattresses. Sadness. But yeah, all that rambling to tell you that everything has a lobby, and lobbying is considered a very much acceptable practice, and no necessary practice. I mean, if you go back to an interview that I had last year with a German Green MEP, Daniel Freund, a guy who used to be in the Transparency International, so not really someone that you can accuse of being pro-lobby, said no, lobbying is essential to democracy, as long as it is done with rules and in full transparency. Anyway, What else did we talk about? If you have questions or comments, go ahead, because otherwise I'm rambling about my notebook. We talked about Renew having a lot of variety inside. Renew, so the centrist party is indeed very well known for being very divided, because there's a lot of different shades of liberalism. So yeah, indeed, it's group meetings in Renew are can be a bit messy. I mean, during the previous mandate, or the previous version of Renew, which was called RD, was known to be constantly divided. So you always had 50% of the group voting one way and 50% of the group voting the other way, because basically you had a division between, like, let's say the Nordic liberals and the 1,000 centrists, so to say. One being more like a liberal in the economic sense of the term than the other, and the other being a bit more conservative on societal issues, for instance. Germany on Ukraine, I think we discussed that at length. Even if, like, she was saying that Germany was doing a lot. Germany is doing stuff, but it's been dragging its feet non-stop. I think it's undeniable on this front, and Scholz spent his time saying, no, we will not do that, and 1 week later, okay, we're doing it anyway. So it's been like a constant back and forth from Germany on this. I mean, you'll remember the infamous helmets that the Germans were sending to Ukraine, and trying to sell that as a huge gift to Ukraine. Yes, let's talk about the final things. The change of treaties. So yeah, that's the Conference of Future of Europe. That's going to take some time. We discussed about that not yesterday, but on Sunday. We have a bunch of countries that are currently not big fans of changing treaties, or at least changing the treaties significantly to do what the parliament would want. So giving it a power of initiative, giving it the power on the budget, these kind of things. So there's a list of 13 countries that do not want it. More or less, you can imagine that about half the countries do not want big reforms on the treaties, only things that are very targeted and not necessarily necessitating a deep revision of the treaties, for a bunch of reasons, either because they have their own interest to protect, because some small countries are afraid that they would be, if you were to remove unanimity on some policy, they would get put in a position of weakness compared to the big countries like France and Germany. You have some countries that are a bit traumatized. Well, they don't traumatize, maybe a big word, but they didn't forget the last time that there was referendums on EU treaties, and so they're afraid that of how the citizens would react to change of treaties. So there's a bunch of reasons for which countries are reluctant to that. But like she mentioned, treaty change all the time. It's true. In general, you have a change in the treaty, in the EU treaties, every 10 years or so. The last time we had a change in the treaties was in 2009 with the Treaty of Lisbon. So yeah, it tracks. We're gonna be soon at the 15-year mark. So it makes sense that we change there needs to be a change of treaty. Then the question is, how far do you change the treaties? Do you just do like some things very targeted, like increasing competencies on health issues, on some defense issue, that sort of thing? Or do you go into the big stuff like removing the vetoes and giving the parliament a right of initiative, that sort of thing, which are much more difficult to achieve, especially when you have countries like, well, governments, rather, like the current Hungarian and Polish government, who will die before they agree to drop any kind of veto or increase the powers of the parliament. She mentioned a number of commissioners. She said, oh yeah, one thing we should do is reduce the number of commissioners, because right now there is one commissioner per country, so 27 commissioners. Well, 26 plus the president of the commission. And she said, oh yeah, it makes no sense to have this many. Funny thing is that actually in the treaties today, there is no need to have one commissioner per country. Actually, the normal rule would be to have less commissioners. And actually, let me look commissioner number EU treaties. Because they okay, I think there's already in the current treaties the idea that there could be already a commission with less than 27 commissioner, but as an informal deal between member states, because they don't want to lose each doesn't want to lose its own commissioner. There was a deal to say, okay, well, even if we could do a commissioner, like a commission with only 18 commissioners, well, we're going to keep the system where we have 27. That way, everyone has its own commissioner and everyone is happy. So technically, you don't. It's possible if tomorrow, well, not tomorrow, in 2024, after the next elections, the member state could perfectly decide. Now, for this mandate, we will have 18 commissioners and not 27. That would be possible today with the treaties as they are today, but countries want their influence. And what else did we talk about? Nothing that needs a very deep dive. So if you want me to ramble about a topic that was discussed, do let me know in the chat now. Otherwise, I will start my conclusion. Double check. There was a bunch of questions I did not take during the interview because, to be honest, I was afraid that we would run out of time, and we actually were right on time in the end. Just scrolling up. Okay, that we discussed. Good rambles. I chose well. Great. Okay, well, no comments. Then that means I'm using my executive power to start my conclusion. So I hope that you enjoyed the content as usual in the interview. Don't forget to follow the channel if you enjoyed it. If you're feeling extra generous, you can even subscribe. You can also donate, toss a coin to your streamer via Coffee. You have the link there. Follow me on my other social medias. You have the link right there in the chat. Twitter, Discord, YouTube, Facebook, all the good thing. We have a lot of fun there. What's next for you? Initially, I was supposed to have an interview tomorrow night, but it got cancelled. Unfortunately, the MEP had an extra committee appointment because tomorrow is it's a mini plenary. So no interview tomorrow night. So the next time I will see you in English will be on Sunday at 8 for the weekly news review. And apart from that, if there are French speakers, tomorrow I'm on TV. Tomorrow I'm doing a small interview on the channel. About the channel on French TV on Public Sena. So if you want to see my face and hear me ramble about the channel, I'll drop a link on the Discord and the Twitter. So make sure to follow there. But yeah. I hope you enjoyed, and I wish you all a good end of the week, and I will see you on Sunday or later on. Have a good one, guys. Bye.